Kaon Interactive helps the world's leading B2B Fortune 1000 marketing and sales leaders to transform their complex value stories into custom-built applications built on a platform for seamless omni-channel deployment and reusability. And with me is the CEO of Kaon, Gavin Finn. So Gavin, great to see you today.
Such a pleasure to be here, Jane.
Thanks. So just tell me about Kaon. So I gave a little brief description. What exactly does that mean? What do you do?
Well, as you mentioned, these very large enterprise companies have very complex solutions, and the buying ecosystems have actually become very complex in the last several years. And so it's become increasingly difficult for them to create competitive differentiation in the market consistently. And as a consequence, without being able to do that, they get commoditized in these sales situations. So sales cycles become very long, and they get into price wars when they shouldn't. So Kaon is a B2B software company, and we create digital customer engagements that allow them to convey these complex stories in a way that customers can interact themselves instead of being presented to. And they can learn on their own what's the difference between these solutions and the competitive solutions. So what ends up happening is they get a much better understanding of these companies' value differentiation, and they make better buying decisions, and they shorten their sales cycles.
I see. And so they become less of a commodity, which always kind of leads to lowest price stuff. So that's good for them. And explain the B2B part of it. So are these B2B e-commerce? Like what kind of companies are you working with?
So we work with companies in all kinds of B2B environments, enterprises in life sciences, in information technology, in industrial automation. Any company that has complex solutions where they're solving very difficult problems and the solutions themselves have become increasingly technically complex.
And then how has the hybrid work environment changed what you do?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people have focused on, well, how do we get our team to be more effective in this hybrid environment? And what they have to also recognize is customers are in a hybrid remote environment as well. So there's this duality of us not being in the office all the time and the customers not being in the office all the time. So making those connections is much more challenging than people might think. And so actually what's happened in the remote and hybrid environment is that people have become much more discerning about how they spend their time. Salespeople have found it much more difficult to get in front of customers remotely. And when they do, they're for shorter periods of time. And something that I know you've noticed because you've spoken about this, people get distracted a lot more easily when you're in these remote or hybrid environments. So it's become a lot more challenging for B2B sales and marketing teams to actually engage with their customers because in these environments, the customers are much more distracted.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting that it's harder to get in front of people. It's it'll be easier. But you may have a solution for this, right? It's called Live Share. Explain that.
Yeah, so what happens is when people are trying to get together, because these buying ecosystems have become much more complex, on average, there's now 12 or more different buying constituents when enterprise sales is involved. And so what happens is they have long sales cycles, and each one of them is in this distracted environment. So LiveShare is a way to bring people together in a digital environment and have them collaborate at the same time. It's the first time that people have been able to create interactive experiences that's not just a one-on-one, it's multi-user. So think about it this way. If you remember when you were in high school, you went on a museum tour, and the tour guide would take you into the museum, and then they would say, okay, go and explore on your own. So you're exploring the same space, but having your own personal experience. And then they bring you together and say, let's look at this dinosaur or whatever it was at the time. So imagine a salesperson giving their customers exactly the same experience. 4 or 5 people on a call, they're all in the same digital space, exploring a factory or a hospital or something of interest to them, learning about solutions at their own pace and at their own sequence. And then the guide, the salesperson, can bring them together and they can collaborate around answering questions together. And the result of this is, instead of having this sequential process of trying to get those 12 people involved in a sales process, when you get them together at the same time, they get their answers at the same time, and it shortens the sales cycle. So imagine not having to do 12 different discrete sales meetings. You would have to do, let's say, 3. You've now reduced the sales cycle by a factor of 4.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so there is kind of a more efficient way to do this as well. So how do you see the future of meetings and sales calls and things like that? I mean, there's so much, even the metaverse we've heard about. Where do you see things going?
Well, I think the challenge is going to be getting people to spend time with another human being, because today what's happening is people want to do their own research, they want to do their own discovery, and more people, and I know you've been familiar with this, Jane, but in the B2B world, in enterprise, that buying process has changed dramatically as well. They want to be buying online, they want to be discovering online, and then they want to be the one to get in touch with the salesperson when they need it. They don't want to be the recipient of all these calls. So that's the first thing, is we're going to see a lot more control on the part of the buyers themselves. And the second thing is people don't want to be presented to. Nobody ever woke up in the morning and said, oh, yay, today I'm going to go to 3 PowerPoint presentations, right? That's going to be energizing. What ends up happening is people want to be actively involved. They want to be engaged. So those more infrequent sales meetings need to be much more active, and they're going to be highly engaging. And I think what's going to end up happening is sales is going to transform from a sort of selling and telling kind of mode to a collaboration mode and problem solving. Instead of saying, buy my product, here are the features and functions, these are going to turn into highly informative and valuable collaborative problem solving sessions. So the salespeople are actually going to be elevated in their role from being product sales or solution sales to being collaboration and problem solving partners on the part of the customers.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I kind of see hints of that already happening in certain areas. So were some of these trends already in place, would you say, before the pandemic? Or did this completely upend everything or accelerate it? Or how did the pandemic play into this?
Certainly things were trending in this direction. So there was a big acceleration. But what ended up happening was people got surprised at how ready enterprises were to buy in a digital remote selling environment. And what people always had in their minds was this model that for large enterprise sales, you needed to be in person. There needed to be something physical about looking at the product or meeting the people in person. And that myth was busted during the pandemic. And so what ended up happening was the acceleration not only turned into more people getting comfortable with this environment, but actually buyers being more comfortable making large purchases of very complex solutions without ever having met the people face to face, or sometimes never even having seen the solutions themselves. And that's really been transformative across the global B2B enterprise landscape.
Well, it's been fascinating to live through and watch, and it's going to continue to be as we adapt to this new normal that we're going to have in the workforce. So thank you so much, Gavin, for coming and sharing your insights.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Jane.